I'm Marta Ceroni. I work at the Academy for Systems Change. But before I talk about a little bit my work there or our work there, I would like to share a little bit about what brings us together and the intention for this conversation, but most importantly, the intention for the series. So, Ras or Melissa, if you'd like to share our welcoming slides. Again, welcome for anyone who's joining right now. I'm so excited about this inquiry, first of all, because it doesn't happen every day that I get to talk to dear people and about what really matters in our lives, like well-being. And initially, we came together to really ask the question, what is well-being and how might we support everyone to have it? And initially, we even thought it was going to be a webinar series. And the more we engaged on this topic and met with many of you, the more these became opportunities to engage in conversations and really reframing our work from a well-being perspective. So not so much from the problem-solving aspects, even if we might take a systems approach. We wanted to go beyond problem solving. We wanted to embody some of this work that comes from a more aspirational, abundant, thriving space in ourselves and in the communities that we are a part of and cultivate. And so with that inquiry around how might we create the conditions for ourselves and our families, communities, workplaces to really thrive and experience well-being, we wanted to do it in community. So we wanted to be in relationship with our respective communities. And so that's the invitation here, to develop connections. That's one of our purposes, to develop connections and learning connections, expanded relationships. I made friends through these conversations with folks who had never seen before. Some real friendships emerged. And so you never know what happens in one of these calls, indeed. And again, what happens if we bring attention to well-being in our lives and in our work? If we center it, there can always be a question at the individual level and beyond, even at the systemic or working place. What happens if actually we put all our intentions to cultivating these conditions for everyone around me to thrive? And today, I think it's going to be a really, really interesting conversation with dear colleague and friend Lucinda Garthwaite here with us. We are hearing more about her work and directly, of course, from her experience. So I just want to share a couple of words of where I'm coming from professionally and what the Academy for Systems Change and well-being is a way that for us to frame what we do. It's part of our mission and vision. And the way we frame it is in the sense of transforming systems towards a future that is rooted in love, that holds dignity, equity, belonging, and thriving for all life. And we work collectively and deepening relationships in the larger field to really cultivate capacities around system leadership and systems change from a number of lineages and perspectives. And with that, I just extend another welcome to all of you for being here and for sharing this deep intention and inquiry and curiosity around well-being and what that might look like, especially in systems that have entrenched patterns of not necessarily creating well-being. So with anything else that I want to add, I think this is it for now. So Ras, you can take it away from me. Thank you so much again.
Grazie, Marta. I want to talk a little bit about Co-Creative, the other co-host for this series, which we've moved away from using the term webinar. I know it was on a previous slide, but these don't feel like webinars anymore. They feel like community sessions where we're just coming together and sharing and exploring and reflecting together on well-being. So as part of whatever this series is, series of community sessions, Co-Creative and Academy for Systems Change have been partnering on this. And Co-Creative is very complementary to the Academy in a way. We are actively supporting systems change collaborations at different levels. Some are very local, place-based, some are national in the US and different countries, and some are international in their scope. They're all related to how do we create the conditions for us all to be well, to have better futures together. So we're agnostic about particular issues. We work in health, economic development, energy, food, all of the areas of the Sustainable Development Goals, and then also do training and capacity building for folks who want to lead in this way more collaboratively and systemically. So for today's session, we're doing a welcome. We're going to do some introductions. I'm going to introduce our speaker, but we also want to hear who's in the room. That's one of our traditions, is getting a sense of who's arrived here and who are we, at least some aspects of who we are as a community, do a little bit of grounding, connecting. Lucinda is going to offer the frame around a liberatory frame around the work that has often been framed in terms of equity, and talk about the implications of that. And then we'll reflect together individually, reflect, and then break out into groups and have some sharing of our reflections on what's coming up for us. When we come back together, we want to then harvest some of what's coming up for us as a community around implications for our work, for example, or just what's present for us as we reflect on what Lucinda has shared. And then we'll talk a little bit about what's next. We got some other upcoming sessions, and we'll move toward a close. If you need any technical support, you can in Zoom chat directly to me. You can chat directly to Melissa Darnell, also from Co-Creative, and we will get you some help. Okay. I will say we're using a new polling tool, which we'll use a couple times in the session. Hopefully it's seamless, but because we're new to it, I can't guarantee it. So if you have any problems with that, especially, we would love to know it. Not just so we can help you, but so we can learn about this new tool. Lucinda Gartway. I met Lucinda. This is how I do introductions, because you can go find so many bios about Lucinda online that talk about her work. But I'll share my experience of Lucinda, and that is when we were both at Goddard College, which Lucinda is currently in one of the classrooms of what used to be Goddard College, and we're both feeling some loss, I guess, around the closure of that institution, but a very, very progressive educational institution, progressive in the traditional sense of progressive education, about interest-led learning and learning together in community from diversity, etc. I experienced Lucinda as often the sharpest person in the room, the person who could name the thing that was just on the edge of the rest of our awareness, or the person who could presence something that needed to be presenced in the room. So not just insightful, but frank and honest in presencing things in groups. And I think that led into her role at the Institute for Liberatory Innovation, innovating around these issues of justice and equity and liberation, and how do we create ways of thinking and frameworks that don't just rely on changing other people's beliefs, but starting to enact and adopt behaviors that reflect values of liberation, and I think by implication equity and justice. But that's all part of what Lucinda is going to share in this session. So very much looking forward to this. Both Lucinda's insight and Lucinda's forthrightness, I think, will become apparent as she shares. This isn't really marking a threshold, but I do want to share, as we transition into this space together, a little welcoming poem. This is from a combination of Beth Strano and Mickey Scott Bay Jones. And so there's a couple versions of this. This is the latest one. And you may have heard this. If you've heard it before, I invite you to still lean into it because it's so rich in terms of a welcome to a space together. An invitation to a brave space. Together, we will create brave space because there's no such thing as a safe space. We exist in a real world. We all carry scars and we've all caused wounds. In this space, we seek to turn down the volume of the outside world. We amplify voices that fight to be heard elsewhere. We call each other to more truth and more love. We have the right to start somewhere and continue to grow. We have the responsibility to examine what we think we know. We will not be perfect. It will not always be what we wish it to be, but it will be our brave space together, and we will work on it side by side. So I'm going to put a link into the Zoom chat, and that is to a polling tool. And we want to use this as a way just to get a sense of who's in the room. You will see, I'll just show you the questions here. When you get into that chat, you'll see 3 questions. First, we just want you to share your name. That'll be just some, there'll be a field for that. And then one gift you're bringing to our work together today. What is your gift you bring, not maybe just to our work together today, but to your work in the world? Where are you joining from today? Like a place we can find on a map. And then one value that consistently informs your life and work. So we encourage you to drop that into this, whoops, I got to get the right people to text this to in the Zoom chat. Click on the link for AHA Slides, and please share there. I see 41 people in. If you're not able to get in, just let us know in the chat. And we'll give folks just a minute or two here to finish sharing. All right, let's see. I'm going to go back here, actually. So many, many gifts, open-heartedness. Kim is bringing a deep breath. Martha, vulnerability, collaboration, earnest curiosity. I think you'll see that from Lucinda. Steve also bringing curiosity. Others are coming in here. More curiosity, creative experimentation, attentiveness, even more curiosity. What a beautiful thing. There's so many people bringing curiosity. Openness of heart and spirit, presence, joy, deep belief in the possibility of change. I'm seeing curiosity so much. I think it's the topic that we're also being cued into curiosity around, right? An open heart and mind, solidarity, creating spaces for deeper connection. My experience from South Africa, from apartheid to now. Looks like we have more here. There's a phrase that emerged and just grow inside of me. Amber might be able to share that in Chinese. Could be translated to everything is arranged for the best. The gift I want to share to everyone is if you firmly believe that everything is arranged for the best, then everything will be arranged for the best. All right, I'll go to the next one here. Where are you joining from? Certainly lots of people from across the US. Looks like some folks from Canada, South Africa. Thank you for joining us. And in one word, please share a value that consistently informs your life and work. Now, I don't know why this is not showing, but I'm going to stop sharing while I mess around and try to figure that out. Well, we're going to share those beautiful values in a follow-up because they're not coming up and we don't know why. I do want to share a few things before we transition to Lucinda here. And those are a reminder, this is a 90-minute session. We realize some folks have hourly appointments. You might need to leave at the hour. That's okay. If you can stay for the whole 90 minutes, you'll be able to participate in that reflection and discussion with the group around these topics. We also are recording this session. That recording will be shared publicly. So just encouraging folks to make your own choices about what you want to share in a recording that will be shared with more people on the web. It'll be shared with people who registered and weren't able to attend, but also with folks who come to the Co-Creative website or the Academy for System Change website later. We also recognize we are all whole human beings. And we would love if folks are able to, especially in the breakouts, to turn on your video and you have messes, dirty laundry, cats, dogs, other animals, whatever. Let's all welcome that as part of our whole being experience. And just remember that even though we're joining together from such diverse geographic spaces, we can still create an intimate social space here together. So in terms of what we talked about with the brave space, we're encouraging people to take a risk in this community to share what's really coming up for you and going on for you. We also invite you, if you like, to have a pen and paper, if you like to take notes, and we will also be sharing both the recording, as I said, and also the slide deck. So you'll have access to all the slides that Lucinda is about to share with you. So I think let's jump into it. Lucinda.
Thank you, Russ. Do I have the slides?
You do have the slides.
All right, great. Thank you, Russ. Thank you, Marta. I'm really honored to be here, everyone. And I also want to thank Melissa and your colleague, Maricela, who's not here, for holding this process so warmly and skillfully. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to share these ideas. They're really only ideas, after all. As the activist and writer Adrienne Marie Brown has said, and I think she is so wise, she's gracefully written that strategy for social change is always emergent. So I'm sharing emergent ideas with you, and I'm very seriously eager to learn from your responses. At the very end of when I'm finished talking, I'm going to put up a slide that has some QR codes on it. One of those is my email, and I mean it. Please write to me if you would like to. So we started the Institute for Liberatory Innovation because we were really impatient for change. It seemed to us, as I imagine it does many of you, that systemic change in the service of social and economic justice wasn't happening fast enough, and in many alarming ways was sliding back. So we set about trying to understand why that might be the case and generating new approaches that would move the needle faster and drive more durable change. Before I keep going, though, I just want to stop for a minute and set a couple parameters. And that's what this slide is. First of all, that word equity. Social equity means about as many things as there are people in the room. So I'm not going to spend time today trying to sort that out. For today, when I refer to equity, I mean something in the vicinity of what's on this slide. Everyone has access to the resources they need to participate in the system, unencumbered by limitations based on social identity or systemic bias. It's a placeholder. Also, when I speak about systemic change today, I'm referring to systems whose purpose and structure distinguish them from other systems. Some call these bounded systems. Our work is primarily in those systems, in schools and organizations of all kinds, and systems boundaries are not impermeable. Schools and organizations touch so many lives that they make powerful leverage points for larger systemic change. That's our thinking. In the end, we hope that our work with organizations and schools contributes to larger social change. But when I'm talking about systems today, I'm talking about bounded systems. So as we sought to understand the slow pace of change, as well as the fading impacts and growing resistance to equity initiatives, we explored the literature. We explored a lot of literature and wisdom traditions, and we also engaged in some interviewing. So we looked at systems change in theory, social, educational, and behavior psychology, philosophy, history. We studied successful social change movements, especially nonviolent social change. And I interviewed dozens of people in all kinds of organizations. So the insights we found in all of that led to this reframing. And here are a few. I'm not going to go through these slides completely because you have them, you can look at them. But the first one was behavior. And the big aha was that behavior is easier and faster to change than belief. And we were interested in speed. So we paid attention to behavior. I'll let you read the rest of these. We also paid attention to, it's not clicking, Russ. Oh, there it is. You're doing it. Okay. We also paid attention to fear. This is a really important one. What we realized is that equity concepts, even the construct of systemic racism, can actually feel like an existential threat. And when people feel existentially threatened, it means they fear they could not exist. And fear can't be argued with. So we realized that whatever we did, we needed to figure out how to work with fear, rather than just dismiss it or disparage it, as so often happens. What are you afraid of? People can tell us what they're afraid of. The other insight that we talked about is that we learned about is learning. Russ, I'm having a little trouble with the slides. Are they showing up?
I think Lucinda, Melissa's actually sharing because yours weren't showing up in the screen.
Okay, good. Melissa, you got it. Okay, great. So I'm not going to worry about what I see. Great. Okay. All right. The other piece was learning. We know this. Russ talked about Goddard College. Those of us, there's a number of us on the call who have experience here. Adults learn best in response to their own curiosity. This is a well-established pedagogical position. And mandated learning often breeds or exacerbates resistance to the knowledge being offered. The other piece is that equity content, I'll just keep going back to notions of systemic racism, generational trauma, can actually, if it's not delivered in the context of skills, it can actually create harm for the people it's meant to lift up. Equity dynamics are complex and therefore confusing. And understanding and sense making is emergent, not static. We understand equity differently today than we did 10 years ago. So that is a really important piece. We also talk at the ILI a lot about the fact that we believe that humans bumble. Humans are vulnerable to fear and to greed and to limitations of their thinking. It is part of the human condition to make mistakes. These are pieces we read from philosophy, but these aren't major insights. However, taken together, they suggested two big reframes. One of those is, so we're on slide 15. One of those is this one. So one of the things we noticed is that social equity is often defined in terms of static characteristics. Remember, we're talking about bounded systems. A system is equitable when it has achieved and can demonstrate all or most of those static characteristics. It's inequitable, quotes around that, when it's not. But that doesn't really make any sense because systems never stop changing, right? They are incapable of not changing. What matters is the direction of change. What's increasing? What's decreasing? Does the change reverse? Does it double back on itself over and over again? Or does it sustain its direction? So reframing equity as liberatory change means letting go of static achievement in favor of sustained change. That's the biggest reframe. So static achievements are things like shared or enforced beliefs and ideas. We think more in terms of more and more people thriving, more and more people behaving in ways that makes it possible for other people to thrive. Static characteristics of an equitable organization means that people are safe from bigotry. There's active anti-bias. There's an intolerance of bias. There's a shared intention to undo oppression. These are markers in the reframing that's dominant now, arguably. Remember, it's an idea. These are markers of an equitable organization, and it's static. If you don't have these things, you're not equitable. We're suggesting to reframe that as increase and decrease, increased intolerance for bigotry and stubborn ignorance, decreasing degradation and violence, evolving, emerging, and strengthening practice. You can take a snapshot at any given time of a system and say, we're here, we'd like to get there. You can still have goals, but to take a snapshot and say, we are not equitable, we're failing, when the truth is systems always change, is what brought us to this reframe. We think of liberatory change in terms of more and more people thriving, having access to what they need to be well and live a meaningful life by their own definition of meaning, as who they are and are becoming, and behaving in ways that make it possible for others to thrive. So that's the big reframe. The other big reframe is what drives liberatory change. So again, dominant approaches to increasing thriving or increasing equity depend largely on changing beliefs. They require exposure to certain information and ideas. Often it requires agreement with those ideas. Social identity is paramount, and it's assumed that the more social identities there are in a system, the more equity there will be. That, it turns out, has a lot of research behind it and is sadly not at all the truth. It's also assumed that equity cannot happen without absolute intolerance of bias and prejudice based on ignorance. Harm is met with punishment. So these kinds of approaches often take the form of punitive policies, diversity initiatives, mandatory training, single employees tasked with leading systemic change and held to account when it doesn't happen fast enough. This is the diversity coordinator. Here in the US, the focus is often on eliminating bias, advancing particular ideas about the roots and nature of social inequity, and requiring particular cultural competencies. Actually, we learned there's plenty of evidence to suggest that these drivers don't often enough lead to durable change, and sometimes they exacerbate fear or contribute to negative consequences for the very populations they mean to lift up. So we thought about our reframe as different drivers. We look at behaviors, we look at learner-centered information, we look at specific nuanced tolerance and intolerance. We teach, I'm not going to talk about this a lot today, but we teach assessment skills. And we, very importantly, we teach restorative responses to harm. So the implications of this are many, but here are just a few. In terms of what we do out in the field, we work with nuanced tolerance and guardrails. We teach personal equity practice. We do that before we offer content. We normalize right at the outset that there will be confusion, there will be honest ignorance, people will honestly make mistakes, and that there will be no punishment for that. There is a way to respond to the harm that's caused from that, but there's not going to be any punishment for normalized confusion, honest ignorance, and mistakes. We don't mandate learning. In fact, it's in our contract. And we ask that there be no negative consequences for non-participation because it turns out systems can change regardless of how many people show up at the training. We offer content learning in context of practice, and we do teach systems assessment practice. I'm not going to talk much about that at all about that today. But I do want to say a little bit about two things. One is nuancing tolerance. This has a surprising impact when we go out and talk. People are ready for this first slide. They're ready for us to say, all right, we've got to build systemic guardrails. We do that with artifacts, we do that with relationships, we create structures and policies. We build guardrails. We say that if liberatory change is a road, we need guardrails to protect that road from these things: behavior based on bigotry, hate, or willful prejudice, diminishment, punishment, or threat of either. That's diminishment or punishment of everyone. I can't tell you how often I go into organizations and it's suddenly okay to make bigoted jokes about old white men. And I say, no, there actually can't be diminishment, punishment, bigotry on any level. Persistent bias or ignorance pointed out and then willfully persisted with. Exclusion rooted on persistent bias, ignorance, bigotry, or hate. Persistent and unaccountable harm, persistent complacency, and unexamined systems. These are the things that we say the system can't tolerate. We need to build guardrails against them, and we need to be really, really alert to these. The piece that surprises people is, am I missing a slide? I think I am, darn it. I'm missing a really important slide. Okay, I'm just gonna say this. The piece that surprises people is when we say what they have to tolerate. We say the system must tolerate mistakes. It must tolerate honest mistakes, honest ignorance. It has to tolerate that. It has to tolerate consistent discomfort, because this is uncomfortable stuff. Discomfort, not harm. It has to tolerate harm as long as harm is met with accountability and particular harms don't persist. So it has to tolerate things that people are usually surprised. And let me just say to everyone, Melissa, I'll send you that slide, so when you send this out, it can be corrected. I apologize for that. So we spend a lot of time on this because the notion of having to tolerate those things is new. People are used to not tolerating, and they're used to punitive responses to saying this thing can't be tolerated, we're going to punish. They're not used to saying, oh, we're going to feel uncomfortable all the time. The first thing we say when we come in is there will be no safe spaces. We cannot guarantee you will not be harmed or that you will not cause harm. We can help you learn what to do about that. So the other piece that we do, and I'm going to slow down here, is we teach personal practice. Now, I know the announcement promised 8. But since we've realized 5, since I wrote that description, we've done some more work with this. We realized 5 is enough to remember, and that these 5 actually cover the basis of what we've learned in all of our research and learning. So these have taken us years to develop, I would say 10 or 11. And that represents a synthesis of all the sources we've considered. The beauty of personal practice is twofold. First, relationships are powerful leverage points for human systems change. And second, as has often been noted, there's only one thing over which anyone, notwithstanding illness and cognitive limitations, has full control, and that's our own behavior. Viktor Frankl famously said this, and so did Nelson Mandela, so did others, who even in the most heinous of circumstances realized they could still behave. So when I first started looking at this, I was looking for what's the most accessible leverage point for liberatory systems change, and it is our own behavior. I want to make something clear here. I'm not making the argument that systems can be changed just by individuals doing stuff. These behaviors have to be practiced. They have to be taken up. If we're looking at systemic change, they have to be taken up by a few people. They have to be really committed to and with the intention of driving liberatory change, because that is, after all, what practice is. So practice is behavior with intention over and over again. We say practice is trying again and again with intention. Practice never makes perfect. Practice only makes change. So the 5 practices that we work with are steadiness, It's sort of in the order of difficulty, by the way. Steadiness, earnest curiosity, steely compassion, accountability for harm, and this surprises some people, grace. So I'm going to take time to just, again, we'll spend 2 days with an organization on this, but I just want to introduce you to these sort of briefly. First is steadiness. And this is a replacement, by the way, for the kind of accusatory term of fragility, male fragility, white fragility. Instead of saying people are fragile, we encourage people to be steady. When they're met with something difficult, we encourage them to take a deep, quiet breath, reassure themselves, notice their thoughts and feelings, and listen, and pay attention to what's just happened. I've caused harm. I've been harmed. I'm only uncomfortable. So if they've caused harm, we direct them to practicing accountability, which we'll get to in a minute. If they've been harmed, or if they're only uncomfortable, to hold steady and consider a response. We spend a lot of time with people differentiating between discomfort and harm. That's an important differentiation. It lives in the person, but it's an important differentiation. When I do this work with groups, I ask somebody to come up and stand with me, and I stand and I ask them to push me, and then I almost fall over, and then I spread my feet and I fall over a little less, and I spread my feet and I fall over a little less. And I say, this is steadiness. Embody that sort of spread feet, take a breath. It makes a tremendous difference when we do sort of case studies and role plays with people, and we bring something really challenging, and I say, stop before you react, get steady. It's really important practice. The next practice is earnest curiosity. This is not just any curiosity. It's the kind of curiosity I imagine is here today. It's motivated by a determination to change and do better. It celebrates not knowing as an opportunity to learn, not as a threat. It considers the potential impact of curiosity before acting on it. It asks before asking. It really hits hard in groups when I say this. They have to ask before asking. And what I mean is, I'm curious about that experience you had. May I ask about it? Are you interested in talking about it? Before I say, what happened? So that it gives people room to take care of themselves in their own experience, for example, of racism or ableism or homophobia or any of the kinds of things that can cause harm. It accepts when others choose not to indulge curiosity. This is how many people have heard someone say, well, how can I learn if you don't tell me? This is earnest curiosity, accepts that maybe you don't want to tell me and I have to find out another way. We contrast this with other kinds of curiosity. We've got a whole workbook on this one, but the curiosity that seeks to be validated, that is insecure, that is protective, that's impulsive, that doesn't ask before asking, and curiosity that feels like it deserves to know. That is not earnest curiosity. Those kinds of curiosities don't drive liberatory change. Earnest curiosity does. The other one is steely compassion. We think about compassion as, there's a lot of ways to think about compassion. We don't think about it in the traditional suffering with, we think about it as not wanting to cause suffering, seeking to not cause suffering. That's what we mean by compassion. Steely compassion requires steeling against the temptation to be indifferent to others' suffering. So we think in terms of soft compassion, which is easy in the context of love and trust and care about the person you're dealing with. It's a little harder, but still relatively easy when you don't know the person well. You don't necessarily love, trust, and care them, but their beliefs and action pose no threat. Gets harder, a lot harder, when their beliefs and actions pose a threat. And it's very difficult. It requires real steel when their beliefs and actions have caused harm. So it's not that we need to forgive or accept or allow. It is just not wanting others to suffer. Brian Stevenson, who was a great teacher of mine, not in person, in reading his work, who, among other things, wrote the book Tender Mercies and also runs the Equal Justice Initiative down in the South, says an absence of compassion can disrupt the decency of a community, a state, a nation. It can make us vindictive and abusive, unjust and unfair until we all suffer. This is a really critical practice, and it's hard. It's much easier to really even think about somebody wanting to suffer or to dismiss their suffering when they've caused harm. So this is a big one. The other really critical one, and we spend a lot of time on this, is accountability for harm. And I want to give credit on this slide. I give credit, and I want to give credit to Mia Mingus, who is a self-described queer disability activist and writer, for this framing of accountability. We've taken it, as she's invited many people to do, and run with it. Accountability for harm requires self-reflection, deep apology, repairing when possible, and then, this is important, changing behavior so the harm you caused doesn't happen again. It's really difficult. This is a tough one. When we do this in groups, and you set intention aside. So the phrase, "but I didn't mean to," gets pocketed. In other words, we say to people, your intention matters. We want you to have good intention. When your actions have caused harm, we encourage people to pocket their intention. I've even had them write it on a piece of paper and fold it up, put it in their pocket. Doesn't argue with harm. If someone experienced harm and they've been harmed, when I get defensive about that, that's mine. Accountability for harm is about accountability to the relationship. It doesn't matter what my intention is. It leaves decisions about repair to the harmed person. They can repair or not. I can change my behavior whether they want to repair the relationship or not. It's not complete without changed behavior, and it may take time for behavior to change, so it's a process. This is one slide on a many hours piece of work with people, but it's a really critical practice. And I think I'm coming up on time, so I will say, the last practice is grace. This surprises people. I'm talking about secular grace. Grace is affirming shared humanity and the possibility of the other person doing better. It's generously holding space for a future where they're doing better. It also accepts without question the emotions, not necessarily the beliefs, of the other. Adrienne Brown says, while all harms are not equal, even the most heinous require a way home. Grace offers a way home. So and grace is hard. So all of these pieces, we don't get to grace until the end. We work with all of these pieces because grace is hard to offer without accountability. It's harder to offer with accountability. Grace is hard to offer without compassion. But offering grace, creating a system that has more grace in it, that accepts the possibility that I will make a mistake today and not make the same mistake tomorrow, begins to free the system up. And what we've learned is that not only do more people thrive in those systems and behave in ways that others can thrive, but the systems are freed up to work on their mission. They don't spend as much time in that sort of ungracious place of held on harm and anger. They accept that harm will happen. They meet it with accountability. They meet it with grace. None of these are easy. I want to be clear about that. And again, I want to be clear that personal practice is not the only piece of what we do. It is a piece that I'm lifting up today because it does affect well-being on the practitioner's part and on the people around them. We work with systems assessment. We work with systems change. We do a whole lot of other work. We work really hard with those guardrails to address the system. So it's not, our approach is not all individual. But we follow up a lot. We work with people on practice. We encourage people to practice. We give them little cards to put up on their bulletin boards. We go back, we say over and over and over again, practice never makes perfect. Practice only makes change, and change is what we're looking for. That's the big reframe. What is the nature of the change we're looking for? And let's all put our shoulders to that change. And let's keep a sharp eye on the system to keep that change moving in that direction. So I will switch to the last slide and leave you with this. It's a kind of confession. So I've been working and living out of the old framing for my whole professional life, and maybe before. I believe that racism is systemic. I believe that ableism is entrenched, that bias is rampant, and harm is generational. I am not immune to rage and righteousness. In fact, those ways of approaching change have felt like the truth, with a capital T, to me for many years. They are really hard to let go of and to be clear. And to be clear, I'm not letting go of my understanding, my own analysis. I'm letting go of that approach to change. I'm realizing that working hard to get people to think the way I do has not driven change fast enough. And I am at heart a strategist. I can try to convince those around me that I'm right about all of these things, or I can apply insight and wisdom from across generations and the world and drive change that's systemic and faster and durable. That's what this reframe is about. So for now, at least, it seems for now, it's an emergent strategy. It seems the strategy of reframing equity as liberatory change could do that job. We'll keep learning and we'll see. And I thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Lucinda. Check in with Martha here, our co-facilitator, on timing, and we were gonna actually see if there were some clarifying questions, but I bet there are a lot of questions and a lot of reflections, and so I just want to check here. Could we maybe take some time, Martha, for individual reflection, like go to the next piece, and then maybe go into breakouts to share reflections? Does that work?
Yeah, that's a good suggestion at this point in the arc. Yeah.
Okay.
So so maybe let's all take one minute and a half or two for really sitting, being with what was just shared and jotting down reflections or just holding reflections in silence for a moment before we break into groups. And I'll share a little bit more about the breakout groups, but now it's just a couple of minutes for integrating and reflecting. Great, maybe I'll just draw our attention back together. And so as we go to the breakout rooms, we're going to spend 10 minutes there. And suggested prompts for your conversations are, like what's challenging? What from what you have heard so far, what's hopeful? You can also engage in a question like what's stirring you up? Yeah, that's also fine. And then when we get back, we'll invite anyone who's willing to share and feels energized about the conversation they've had to share in a plenary setting. So with that, we would like to invite you to consider these questions as you also spent a moment to integrate and reflect. So what's challenging, what's hopeful, what's stirring in you? And Melissa, Russ, let us know when we can join. And I'm just loving the number of resources that are popping in the chat. So thank you for all of that. Welcome back, everybody. Maybe you've been waiting for a while. Yeah, let's take a moment. I'm sure you've had meaningful conversations in your groups. Let's just take a breath back to our full group. And if you feel moved to share, this would be a time to share. But again, appreciating the pause in between.
So Martha, we were going to do a poll. I'm not feeling that. I'm feeling like this is a more intimate space, and maybe we could just ask who's happy to share. What's come up for you?
I was sensing the same, Russ. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we asked for in the breakouts what's challenging, what's helpful, what's stirring in you, what's coming up for you, whichever question resonates with you. We'd love to hear from some folks. Like, what has this brought up for you?
I'll jump in. Our group, I think we talked about balancing steadiness, curiosity, and accountability in ways that we don't meet harm with punishment, but stay with it and close to it as it's shifting and changing.
Hmm.
I can go. So in our group, I said that what resonated me is that I need to learn how to say respectfully, saying that, oh, I'm curious about what's your story. May I ask? Because I oftentimes just like, oh, what's happening? And I'm always very curious. So sometimes it could be a little bit offended or giving people space just to starting to share their story. That's what I learned. And then in our group, Russ shared about the balance of stillness and the compassion, these two forces that need to be balanced, and introduce the concept. I mean, not introduce the concept, but mention the concept of yin and yang. And then I'm really bad at names. So another very lovely person in our group, she said that she lives in New York. Lynn Hassan Yard. She said that she is very resonant with the idea of I need help, Russ. Let me see.
Well, Lynn's here.
Okay, yeah, Lynn, do you mind sharing? I sometimes forget very quickly.
I think I definitely felt that embracing the fact that I'm going to be uncomfortable a lot and that I will cause harm is tricky for me, right? Because I don't want to be either of those things or do either of those things, but I can see how important both of those are to this work. Yeah.
Hmm. Others, what's come up for you?
One of the things that came up in our group from Elsa, who's in South Africa, Elsa, I'm quoting you right away, is that the sort of traditional or dominant ways of approaching this work, she said, were, I'm quoting, completely inappropriate for the magnitude of what we're trying to do. And it really hit me that they're also completely inappropriate for the magnitude of what we're trying to do in this country and in other places, because this system has been with us for so long that just hitting it with information, it's and with punitive responses isn't going to do it. So that was a big aha for me. And also Nicole talking about the neurological roots of that align with what we were what I was talking about earlier. So but both very affirming and brought me to whole new ways of thinking about it, which I love. So I'm so grateful for that conversation.
Lee and Karen and I talked about started with grace and looped all the way around and then ended around grace and being gracious, and about people being curious but being quite frightened of having conversations and not knowing the right language and being fearful of the response when actually they need to almost expose their ignorance to daylight to be able to do any of the change stuff. So yeah, I think that was fair to say, wasn't it, Lee and Karen?
Gemma, that reminds me of in Gestalt, what they call the paradoxical theory of change. That I can't change until I accept fully how I am and who I am now. Simon, was that you? Or someone was going to share?
I think that might have been me.
Rodney.
Yeah, first of all, thank you everybody for your sharing, and thank you for creating the space. I'm grateful for that. One of the things that was resonating with me as a challenge, and I think was shared by the great people in my group, was this tension of the personal practice with the systemic challenge. You know, Lucinda did a beautiful job of scaffolding the personal practice from probably the easiest to the hardest, although we know every part of that ladder is going to be difficult. Obviously, grace being the most challenging. The tension that I was sitting with is how often are we asking people who are harmed to do the personal work? And I think that in and of itself is an awful inequity, to say that those of us who are in harmed places now have to engage in personal work to widen the circle of human concern feels like insult to injury. I know that's not how it was intended. I'm just saying that's how I'm reacting to it. And so if even the most heinous harm needs to come home, and I believe that even the most heinous harm does have to come home, where do those who are committing the most heinous harms, what is their role in addressing that and in being accountable to that? And why is it somebody else's responsibility to kind of bring you in? Because there are people who are hurting now. There are people who are in pain now. There are people who are suffering now. And liberatory change is a long game, and it has to be a long game. And there is very acute harm being done now. And so holding those two things in tension is extremely difficult. I'm hopeful that more spaces like this will widen the conversation. And it's hard to be in that place when harm on large scale is happening right now. So that's my 2 cents. Thanks for the space.
Others, if you felt like maybe some part of you has moved to share and some other part of you stopped yourself from sharing, you have an opportunity here.
So our group talked in part in response to a question from Aja, or a thought about power and how one's relative power in an organization relates to one's ability to do this kind of work. So that was one theme that we were looking at. And another was focusing on the questions of behavior change rather than trying to change beliefs or culture or those more abstract levels, and the power of doing that, of focusing on behavior. So those 2 things definitely came up in our group. the other thing that resonated for me and that we talked about was the importance of what Lucinda talked about people's ability to distinguish between discomfort and harm. And also that basic learning about the intent and impact being kind of a foundation for being able to work in this way. So those two things were also part of what we talked about.
So Lucinda, I know you've been on a learning journey and still are around all this work. And are there any other last questions you have? I see you have been taking notes.
I'm taking notes. Well, I thank you all that these comments are letting me know where I need to be more explicit. Rodney, especially, I want to thank you, and because I'm right with you, and when I'm in a group, I'm doing that work, but when I speak about it, I need to be more explicit, and so those are the notes I'm taking, and also sort of deepening it. So I have all kinds of questions, and I would like to have individual conversations with every one of you. Please, thank you very much. But for now, that's what I can add to the conversation, Russ.
Okay. Marta, anything else before we go on to the closing?
One thing that came up in our group is really also the question of the container. Like, it's not that this work goes away. This is, we need to live it every day, and there are spaces that are more intentional, more consensual. There is the consensual nature of saying yes, which brings back to the question, to the song that we started our conversation with, the saying yes. So what happens if you have people who have not said yes, but you are in this journey? And so there's really, I think there is some grace for people who have been harmed to actually step out of that work and not having to do the work of educating up or, compassionate up, if that exists, But yeah, the awareness of what space I'm in, what consensual, which comes before accountable, right? And so what are the steps to accountability in saying yes in the journey? So
Marta, if I could just jump in and say that again, that this is helping to deepen my explicitness, and I'm so grateful for this. I didn't get to say that the next step that I'm working with right now is what does it mean to be personally, strategically nonviolent in the face of active resistance to liberatory change? And that there's a lot of literature and wisdom about that, and we're diving into it now to kind of figure out how to make that into a practice that is teachable. So if any of you are doing work in that area, I'd love to hear about it. But that's critical, because there is sort of ignorant resistance, and then there is conscious resistance that hangs onto itself. And these practices will help move the system in the first case, but not the second. They're necessary for the second to sit on, but strategic nonviolence, personal strategic nonviolent strategy is what we want to, is our next frontier.
Thank you, Lucinda. Thank you for sharing. We are going to follow up with the slides. I do want to note that Lucinda has referred several times to when we're in session, when we're doing this in the room, in practice, etc. So Lucinda, maybe you could just say a sentence or two about the kinds of offerings that you have in case people want to learn more or engage more.
Sure. We primarily are working now in schools. In fact, both of our equity scholars are here. We have an equity scholar in residence program in schools. Again, I said to my group, if I couldn't use the word equity ever again, I wouldn't. But people don't know what we're talking about if we don't say equity. So we say it and then we define it differently. So we have an equity scholar in residence program in schools that applies these principles, and we work with all kinds of nonprofits and organizations. We're just in the very early stages of creating a certificate program for people who really want to study this in a very practical, learner-centered way. And we do publish a newsletter where I write about this, and soon other people will be writing about this every other week. Please feel free to sign up for that, and then you'll know what else we're doing. There's my quick piece, but our work is based strongly in all of this thinking, and it is firmly acknowledges the need for emergence. We're never going to get it right. We're going to get it right now, and then we're going to think about it again the next minute. Thanks,
All
Russ.
right. Thank you, Lucinda. I'm going to bring us to close here. You'll get this in the slide deck, so just showing you what's in there. Lots of resources from Academy for Systems Change around systems change and systems analysis, systems change. You'll see maybe some things that are familiar and not familiar on the left, and some resources on the right. Our esteemed colleague Martha is the co-director of the Academy, and also director of the Denali Meadows project. So lots of, like, a whole vast inventory of wisdom from Denali Meadows around systems change. And co-creative, lots of resources on facilitating and leading systemic change. You'll see some on the right there, and some opportunities, learning opportunities coming up on the left. So again, we'll share these in the follow-up. And I think what's left is just appreciation. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for sharing. And thank you for being in this inquiry with us. How about, as we close here, let's unmute and just greet one another as real whole human beings, not just faces on a screen.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Wonderful.
Everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Que tengan buen día.
Okay, take care.
Appreciate you all.
Merci beaucoup.
Lots of love.
Right.
Take care.